To improve the lives and experience of Indigenous people, I think that we have to build capacity within communities so that communities can achieve self-determination. We need to acknowledge and protect Indigenous people's inherent rights to their waters and their lands. We need to be actively decolonizing in all aspects of our lives and working towards revitalization of our old knowledges, languages, and technologies. Indigenous people need our voices to not only be heard, but listened to and taken seriously. We deserve a say and a chair at all these important decisions being made about our country. We need action, and we need purpose behind that action.
Issues like unclean drinking water, improper housing, underfunded schools on reserves, lack of social programs, and poverty and more all plague Indigenous reserves and all have affected both myself and the people in my community. With a decrease in basic human rights, proper care, and extreme trauma due to the results of colonialism, an increase of poor mental health, addiction, and suicide crises arise. In my own personal life, my father has been homeless or incarcerated for as long as I can remember. Both of my parents were addicts, and my mother fell victim to suicide when I was 12. Less than a year later, so did my cousin. About 2 years ago, my cousin overdosed, and last year, my oldest brother lost his battle with addiction to and overdosed on fentanyl. This is a reality for not just me, but many people in my community too. It is a national issue as rates of addiction, suicide, incarceration, and homelessness amongst Indigenous youth continue to rise, and it's something that each and every reserve in Canada is grossly familiar with and needs to stop.
So I saw this this movie based on a true story about how up in the north there's very remote communities, and it's very hard to have these communities get proper access, I guess, to what you could call like real food. To improve the lives, honestly, as well, I'd say the government needs to make an effort to ensure that families who suffer from the 60 scoop need to have this sort of connection recreated with their past. I know from my experience, I don't know very many people who are in my family, and it wasn't until I'd say 2 or 3 years ago until I started meeting everybody and understanding where my culture, or like where my family before me grew up. So I think the government needs to make some sort of organization that's responsible for helping the Indigenous youth who don't have even a proper family maybe right now have this sort of connection that can be reignited with their family.
For people who are ignorant about the Indigenous experience, I'd like to tell them that it's real people and real experiences that you are judging. I never want to show anger towards people because many times judgment stems from not understanding, which stems from a lack of education. These people, above all, need to be educated on the actual Indigenous experience so that they can have a better understanding of the truth. It is okay to ask questions, and it's okay to be wrong sometimes, but you have to take the time to relearn and re-understand.
And to improve the lives and experience of Indigenous people, I feel like there needs to be more education in schools. I know there's like the one day a year we have like a school day where we learn about residential schools, and in grade 11 we have the English curriculum is Indigenous based, but I feel like there should be more than just that. I feel like there should be maybe like school assemblies or like workshops where Indigenous speakers come in and talk about like current issues as well. I know in like some like northern communities, like the price of food is like very high. So I feel like to combat that cost of living, that they should get paid higher wages.
To improve the lives of Indigenous people nationally, I believe that there are a number of things that need to be done. For one, returning land to its rightful owners. Indigenous peoples in Canada represent only 4.9% of the total population, but we only hold 6.3% of the total landmass of the country. This is greatly problematic because over 50% of Canadian-owned land is illegally owned, and this is especially discounting how many tribes were coerced into selling land. But here's the thing. Indigenous peoples are not calling for all land to be returned, because in today's world, we know that that's not realistic. We are, however, calling for about 30% of that land back, but we're also fighting to have stewardship over the land. With climate change issues growing drastically, we need to especially recognize the fact that, while only accounting for 5% of the world's population, Indigenous peoples protect over 80% of the world's biodiversity. We are and always have been caretakers of the land, and this needs to be implemented on a governmental scale, which is why we need stewardship. More key actions toward reconciliation also involve drastically increasing the quality of life on reserves. This includes mass funding, as reserves are grossly underfunded by the Canadian government as it is. But this also comes hand in hand with implementing change outside of reserves too. Government institutions like the justice system, Children's Aid Society, healthcare, education, and more all need to decolonize and take culturally sensitive based approaches to their practices, especially in regards to Indigenous people. There's so much more that needs to be done, but for the time being, these are the most pressing matters in my eyes that will be key to reconciliation.
I think we can create healthier relationships with Indigenous communities, mainly by, first of all, we need to listen. I think that's definitely a big issue. The grade 11 Indigenous studies programs and about, national issues, it's a big step in the right direction, definitely, because it's educating our youth at a very important time in these issues in our country. And it's really, really important that we get them there because, once you get older, if you're brought up on certain ideas or that empathy isn't fostered, it never really develops. So I think that is definitely the most important thing.
Not only for me, like me and my friends, because we all kind of, it's sad, but we all have gone through like the same stuff. Like a lot of my friends have been through foster care. A lot have like been adopted into like a whitish family, and like we all have a really good sense of humor because like we cope with humor. Like it's a thing we use to like, I don't know, like balance out the sadness in our lives. And it is, again, a really like, it's a dark topic, but like it helps us cope. Like we make jokes about our sadness, and as long as they're funny and other people laugh, it's good. Like as long as everyone else is having fun when you're laughing about yourself, it makes it easier to cope with stuff. Yeah.
I do think that humor can be helpful and harmful. I think as a start, humor can be a good icebreaker. If you are feeling uncomfortable bringing up a topic to someone and you kind of express it with humor in a group, it can be a good start to have a serious conversation and to make you feel a little bit less of a weight on yourself with what those problems are that you might be joking about. But I think humor is a really important part of life and can be very joyful and fulfilling.
Yes, I think my culture has a distinct and unique sense of humor because we use our humor as a way to cope, a way to heal, and a way to let some light and laughter into our lives when things might be tough. When my nation went through rough times, it was laughter that was the medicine that kept us together. I think every culture has their own unique sense of humor because we relate it to our collective experiences and we relate it to each other. I know several funny people. I think everyone I know is funny, but they all have different senses of humor. Humor helps build relationships and trust, and it can bring joy and smiles to tough times. I am very thankful for all the funny people in my life for brightening even the darkest of my days.
I've seen it a few times with my grandmother. Multiple times I've seen whenever she goes to a reserve and meets someone new who she didn't know was perhaps a part of her family, or if I go to some sort of ceremony and I see the speaker talking about all of the efforts that are being made or telling a story, I see a lot of different humor being used to kind of captivate what they're saying, and as well as making us laugh and forget.
My main coping mechanism for the trauma is humor. I make a lot of jokes. Some people may see it as unfit or as if I don't care about my trauma, but the jokes is what makes me come to reality with it, because it normally makes you stop and think after a moment after you've laughed.
In Tobic, I feel like Mi'kmaq and Maliseet kind of have like very similar experiences. I think the humor is pretty like similar because we're all like the same and we've been through the same, and our like generational trauma is the same, so we all have the same kind of humor. The humor that we have, it's all based on who we are.
I'd love to tell you an Indigenous joke. It goes like this. What does a ghost say? Boo. What does a Cree ghost say? Boo.